The warning sirens blared through the barren wasteland of Valkyr 7, a desolate mining colony on the fringes of human-occupied space. The sky, once a dull red, now churned with violent green and purple streaks, the telltale signs of an incoming radiation storm. Rook Alistair barely had time to register the alarm before his instincts kicked in. The storm was coming fast, faster than usual. Everyone underground, now, the foreman's voice crackled over the comms. Workers scrambled toward the reinforced tunnels carved deep beneath the rocky terrain. Rook turned to follow but hesitated when he spotted a figure stumbling across the ridge, far from any shelter. A woman. She was dressed in a dusty traveler's cloak, the hood slipping back to reveal a cascade of dark hair and sharp, luminous eyes. She looked disoriented, barely keeping her footing as the wind howled around her. The radiation levels were already climbing. If she didn't get underground within minutes, the storm would cook her alive. Cursing under his breath, Rook sprinted toward her. His heavy boots kicked up dust as he pushed his body to the limit. The winds roared louder, static energy crackling through the air. His radiation meter beeped frantically, warning him that he had seconds before exposure became lethal. He reached her just as she collapsed to her knees, dazed. Without hesitation, he scooped her up in his arms and turned back toward the shelter, shielding her with his body. The first waves of radiation seared through his suit, sending jolts of burning pain along his skin. He clenched his teeth and pressed forward. The entrance to the underground bunker was just ahead. A few miners stood at the threshold, gesturing frantically for him to hurry. With one final burst of strength, he lunged inside as the heavy doors slammed shut behind him. The bunker lights flickered as the reinforced shielding activated, blocking out the storm. For a moment, there was only silence, punctuated by Rook's ragged breathing. His body ached, his nerves screaming from the exposure. He looked down at the woman in his arms. She was unconscious, but alive. Her features were striking, high cheekbones, golden markings faintly glowing along her skin. Something about her felt off. The miners gathered around, whispering. One of them, an older man with a cybernetic eye, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Do you have any idea who you just saved, boy?" Rook frowned, glancing down at her again. Now that he was seeing her up close, something clicked. The intricate markings, the regal posture even in unconsciousness, he had seen similar insignias before. His stomach twisted. This wasn't just some lost traveler. She was royalty. The realization hit him like a freight hauler. He had just risked his life to save someone who, under normal circumstances, wouldn't have even glanced in his direction. Valkyr 7 was a distant mining colony, a place where nobility never set foot. And yet, here she was. Before he could process further, the woman's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she simply stared at him, as if trying to place where she was. Then, recognition flickered across her face, followed by something else, something akin to fear. You saved me." Her voice was soft, but there was an undeniable authority beneath it. Rook swallowed, his throat dry. "Yeah. You were about to be vaporized." She exhaled slowly, sitting up. The room remained deathly silent as the other miners watched, waiting. Then, to his surprise, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm. "I owe you a great debt." Rook almost scoffed. "You don't owe me anything. Just tell me why someone like you was wandering out there alone." A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, but before she could answer, the bunker's intercom crackled to life. Unidentified ships entering orbit. No response to hails. High-energy signatures detected, possible weapons priming. Rook felt his gut tighten. Trouble was coming. And somehow, he had a feeling it was looking for her. The storm outside raged on, but now, inside the bunker, a new storm was brewing. And Rook had no idea just how deep he had been pulled into something far bigger than himself. The intercom buzzed again, the urgency in the operator's voice sharpening. "Repeat, unknown vessels are locking onto colony defenses. Estimated time to contact, 5 minutes." The miners erupted into panicked whispers. Valkyr 7 wasn't equipped to handle a direct attack. The colony had a few outdated turret emplacements, enough to deter raiders, but if these were warships, whoever was up there wasn't just passing by. Rook turned back to the woman. She had gone rigid, her eyes dark with understanding. "They found me," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Rook's pulse spiked. "They?" He had a bad feeling about this. "Who the hell is they?" She met his gaze, hesitating only for a second before answering. "The Sovereign Guard." The room went dead silent. Rook clenched his jaw. Of course. The Sovereign Guard, the elite enforcers of the Imperial Dynasty, the most feared fleet in the known galaxy. They didn't just hunt criminals. They erased problems. Entire planets had vanished from star charts after falling under their scrutiny. And they were here. Looking for her. His chest tightened as realization set in. If the Guard thought she was important enough to send warships after, they weren't just going to take her and leave. They'd level the colony to remove any witnesses. She must have seen the horror in his eyes, because she spoke quickly. "Listen to me, there's a way out. But we need to move. Now." Rook shook his head. "We can't just." The entire bunker shuddered as the first orbital strike hit. Dust rained from the ceiling. The miners shouted in alarm. "We don't have time for arguments," she snapped. "There's a ship, my ship, hidden 2 clicks west of here. If we can reach it before the Guard lands, we can escape." Rook glanced at the other miners, their faces etched with fear. He'd lived his whole life on Valkyr 7, working the mines, barely scraping by. And now, because he had saved one woman, all of it was about to be reduced to ash. Another explosion rocked the bunker. He made his decision. "Anyone who wants to live, grab whatever weapons you've got. We're getting out of here." The old miner with the cybernetic eye, Derek, gave him a hard look before nodding. "Ain't got much, but I'd rather fight than die like a rat in a hole." A few others murmured their agreement. It wasn't much of a force, but it was better than nothing. Rook turned back to the woman. "You better be worth the hell we're about to go through." A ghost of a smile flickered across her lips. "I am." She pulled the tattered cloak from her shoulders, revealing a sleek, midnight blue bodysuit lined with golden filigree. Embedded in the fabric was a crest, a phoenix rising from a sun. Rook inhaled sharply. He had seen that insignia before. The imperial heir. Not just royalty. The crown princess of the galaxy. And he had just made himself an enemy of the Sovereign Guard by saving her life. Before he could process it, the emergency sirens blared again. Enemy dropships inbound. Prepare for ground assault. No turning back now. Move! Rook shouted, grabbing a rifle from the weapons locker. The miners armed themselves as best they could, makeshift weapons, old energy blasters, mining tools modified into deadly instruments. The princess, because that's what she was, took one last look at the bunker before following him up the stairs. The doors opened to chaos. The sky was on fire, streaked with burning debris as the orbital bombardment continued. In the distance, black dropships descended like predatory birds. Soldiers in heavy armor leapt from them before they even landed, their weapons glowing with the eerie blue light of plasma rounds. The Sovereign Guard was here. And they were coming straight for them. Rook exhaled sharply and tightened his grip on his weapon. If they wanted her, they'd have to go through him first. Rook's heart pounded in his chest as the chaos unfolded before him. The dropships were landing rapidly, each one disgorging squads of heavily armored soldiers with the precision of a well-oiled machine. They were here to capture the princess, and if they had to burn the whole damn colony to do it, they would. The miners moved fast, taking positions behind debris and scrap piles, ready to fight for their lives. The princess, though, remained eerily calm. She moved with purpose, her regal bearing still intact despite the situation. Rook couldn't help but wonder how someone like her had ended up here, on a backwater mining planet, with nothing but danger closing in around her. Stay low, Rook ordered as he crouched behind a broken wall, his rifle aimed at the descending dropships. We need to get to the ship, and fast. The princess nodded, her golden eyes flashing with determination. I know the way. Follow me. She led the charge, moving with the grace of someone accustomed to leading armies, not running from them. Rook followed closely behind, his senses heightened by the sound of plasma bolts sizzling through the air. The ground shook as another orbital strike hit nearby. The bunker, their last safe haven, was now a smoldering wreck in the distance. Rook's mind raced, trying to process the gravity of the situation. He had been thrust into something far bigger than he ever imagined. He was no longer just a miner. He was now part of something that could change the fate of entire galaxies. The princess, no, the crowned heir, had been brought to him by fate, and he had no choice but to fight for her survival. As they sprinted through the rocky landscape, Rook stole a glance at the princess. The way she moved, the way she commanded the small group of miners, it was like watching a queen lead her people into battle. He couldn't help but feel the weight of his own inadequacy in comparison, but he pushed the thought aside. Now wasn't the time for self-doubt. They were getting closer to the hidden ship, a sleek, silver craft partially camouflaged against the jagged terrain. The sight of it filled Rook with a strange sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it out of this alive. A loud crack of gunfire broke his concentration. One of the miners, a younger man named Jax, fell to the ground with a scream, a plasma bolt searing through his chest. No! Derek, the older miner, shouted, firing his makeshift weapon at the advancing Sovereign Guard soldiers. But it was clear, there were too many of them. We have to move now. Rook yelled, pushing forward with renewed urgency. The princess turned, her gaze hardening. Leave him. Rook's heart sank, but he didn't argue. There was no time to mourn. They had to survive. The ground around them erupted with more plasma fire, narrowly missing Rook and the others. They were close now, just 100 meters from the ship. But the Sovereign Guard was closing in fast, their soldiers relentless and swift. Get to the ship, now, the princess ordered, her voice carrying authority. Rook didn't need to be told twice. He bolted toward the ship, his mind focused on one thing, survival. The rest of the miners followed, some firing back at the soldiers while others sprinted toward their escape. Derek brought up the rear, but the younger miners were falling behind, too slow to make it. Rook reached the ship first, slamming his hand against the entry panel. The doors hissed open, and the princess was right behind him. The others were close, but Rook didn't wait. He jumped into the cockpit, firing up the engines. The ship roared to life, lifting off the ground as another wave of plasma fire streaked by. Rook could see the dropships in the distance, preparing for another round of assault. He punched in the coordinates to get them out of the atmosphere, his hands shaking as he worked the controls. Hold on, he shouted over his shoulder as the ship surged into the sky, the atmosphere of Valkyr 7 breaking apart beneath them. For a moment, everything was chaos, the screech of the ship's engines, the explosion of plasma impacts against the hull. But slowly, the fire subsided. The ship broke free from the atmosphere, and they were finally in space. Rook let out a long breath, wiping sweat from his forehead. They had made it. For now. But the princess, no, the heir, wasn't celebrating. She was already at a terminal, her fingers dancing over the keys. Rook turned to her, his chest tight. What now? The princess met his gaze, her expression unreadable. We escape. But this is far from over. The Sovereign Guard won't stop until they have me back. And when they find out who helped me, they'll come for you, too. Rook's heart sank again, but there was no time for hesitation. He had already crossed the point of no return. Where are we going? He asked, knowing that his life, and the lives of the miners, were now tied to hers. To the last place they would look, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. We're going to my home. The Imperial Palace. And we'll make them pay for this. Rook didn't know if he believed her. But there was one thing he was sure of, he wasn't walking away from this. Not now. Not after everything he had risked. As the ship hurtled through the cold expanse of space, Rook couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a far larger war. And somehow, he had become a key player in it. The ship glided silently through the dark void of space, the stars stretching out like pinpricks of light in the endless night. Rook sat at the helm, his knuckles white as he gripped the controls. The rest of the miners were scattered around the small cargo hold, sitting in tense silence, their eyes flicking toward the princess, who was still engrossed in her calculations at the terminal. Rook couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. The Sovereign Guard wouldn't give up easily, not when they were so close to their prize. And now, with the princess aboard, Rook knew that they had painted a target on their backs. He glanced over at the princess. She was focused, her golden eyes scanning the data streaming across the terminal, her fingers moving with a grace that was almost hypnotic. There was an intensity in her gaze, a fire that seemed to burn through her skin. "How long until we reach the palace?" Rook asked, his voice breaking the silence. The princess didn't look up, but her voice was steady. "We're still a few days away. But we need to stay under the radar. The Sovereign Guard will be scanning for us, and I can't afford to be found." Rook nodded, his eyes scanning the radar. They were clear for now. But his mind kept racing. The mining colony, the attack, the escape, everything had happened so fast. He had gone from a simple miner to someone caught in the middle of galactic politics, and he had no idea how to navigate this new world. "So, what's your plan once we get there?" Rook asked, trying to push his anxiety aside. The princess looked up then, her gaze meeting his. For the first time, she seemed to soften, just slightly. "I'm going to take back what's mine. The throne was stolen from me, Rook. And I will make them pay for what they've done." Her voice was quiet, but there was an unmistakable conviction in it. Rook didn't doubt her. But he had questions, so many questions. "You keep saying they took it from you," Rook said, trying to make sense of her words. "Who's they? Who's in charge now?" She stood up and walked toward him, her movements smooth, as though she were born to command. "The Sovereign Guard is loyal to the Regent, my uncle. He's ruled in my place ever since my parents were assassinated. But he's no ruler. He's a puppet, and I will free my people from his tyranny." Rook's breath caught in his throat. Assassinated. The princess had been a child when her parents had been killed, and now she was the last of her line, the last hope for a galaxy under the control of a ruthless regime. "I didn't know," Rook murmured, unsure of what else to say. She gave him a tight smile. "Most don't. And I intend to keep it that way for a while longer." Her words sent a chill down his spine. If she was right, then the entire galaxy had been unknowingly living under a regime built on lies and murder. "We have to act fast," she continued, her voice taking on a more urgent tone. "My uncle will be expecting us to try and make a run for it. But if we get to the capital, if we take back the throne, we can rally the people to rise up. The Sovereign Guard will no longer have the strength to hold power." Rook didn't fully understand all the intricacies of what she was saying, but one thing was clear, she had a plan. And he was part of it now, whether he liked it or not. Suddenly, the alarm blared, pulling him from his thoughts. "Alert!" The ship's AI voice crackled. 2 unidentified ships detected. Closing in at high speed. Incoming transmission from Sovereign Guard. The princess's face went stone cold, her eyes narrowing as she turned to the terminal. Rook didn't need to ask. He knew they had been found. "We have to outrun them," she said, her voice tight. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. They won't stop until we're caught." Rook's hands flew over the controls, his fingers moving with practiced precision. The ship lurched forward as he initiated the burn to speed up, sending them into a sharp course toward an asteroid belt ahead. The rocks were scattered haphazardly, but they could serve as cover if they could navigate it fast enough. "Hold on," Rook muttered, his pulse quickening. He could already see the enemy ships on the radar. They were closing in fast, their sleek forms visible through the ship's sensors. "I'm setting the decoy drones," the princess said, her voice calm despite the situation. She stepped to a compartment and pulled out a small device, which she quickly activated. Dozens of small, unmanned drones shot out from the ship, scattering across the asteroid field in an attempt to confuse their pursuers. But Rook knew it wouldn't be enough to fool the Sovereign Guard for long. "We need a way to fight back," he said, glancing at her. She met his gaze, her expression hardening once more. "We won't have time to outrun them forever. We need to take control of their ships. If we can board one, we can turn the tide." Rook's mind raced as he thought about their options. Taking on the Sovereign Guard, even with a ship, was no easy task. They had the firepower, the numbers. But the princess had been trained for this. She had to know something he didn't. "Ready your weapons," she said, walking toward the cargo hold. "We'll board on my signal. Trust me, Rook. This is the only way." Rook nodded, but a feeling of dread settled in his gut. This was no longer just about survival. It was about war. And once they engaged the Sovereign Guard, there would be no turning back. As the first plasma blast exploded just a few hundred meters away, Rook's heart raced. They were going to fight their way out of this, or die trying. And in that moment, he realized he would do anything to help the princess reclaim her throne, no matter the cost. The first skirmish had begun. The ship shuddered as the first plasma blast from the Sovereign Guard ships ripped through the asteroid field, narrowly missing them. Rook's fingers gripped the controls harder, his knuckles turning white as he veered the ship around a massive asteroid, dodging another round of fire. His heart hammered in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Hold on," he shouted, trying to steady the ship. The princess was already moving, her body lithe and precise as she adjusted her weapons systems, preparing for the inevitable battle ahead. "We need to get closer," the princess said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I can board them. Just get us close enough, and I'll take care of the rest." Rook's mind raced. He didn't have much experience in close combat, but he trusted her. She was royalty, a commander in her own right. If anyone could pull this off, it was her. "Get us close," Rook muttered, pressing the ship's thrusters to their limit. The two Sovereign Guard ships were closing in rapidly, their weapons charging. Rook had one shot at this. He didn't intend to waste it. The ship weaved through the asteroid belt with precision, narrowly avoiding several impacts. Rook glanced at the radar. He was on a direct course to intercept the first ship. But the second ship was gaining. They would need to split their attention, and fast. "Now," the princess commanded. Rook slammed the maneuver controls. The ship lurched as it altered course, slamming into the rear of one of the Sovereign Guard ships. The impact sent a violent jolt through the hull, and before Rook could even react, the princess activated a magnetic grapple system. She was already halfway to the hatch. Rook quickly grabbed a rifle and bolted for the rear of the ship, the engines roaring as he fired back at the second Sovereign ship. He was buying time. The princess didn't need him. She had a mission. But he wasn't going to let her face this alone. The airlock opened with a hiss. The princess was already standing in the open doorway, her body sleek in her dark bodysuit, her expression unreadable as she sprinted toward the boarding ramp. Rook followed, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had no idea what to expect, but the stakes couldn't have been higher. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting to change the fate of the galaxy. The ramp slammed into the side of the Sovereign Guard ship. The sounds of gunfire and explosions erupted in every direction. The princess was a blur, leaping into the fray with lethal precision. Rook followed, firing back at the guards as they attempted to surround them. "Move fast," the princess shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to take out the command center, get to the bridge." Rook pushed forward, adrenaline numbing the fear that would have otherwise paralyzed him. He had never been in a real battle before, but the princess fought like a seasoned warrior, her movements fluid and controlled as she took down enemies with swift precision. The ship's interior was a nightmare of flashing alarms, the red lights signaling the chaos unfolding around them. Rook barely kept his footing as he sprinted after her, his pulse a constant thrum in his ears. The Sovereign Guards were ruthless. But the princess, the heir, was unstoppable. They reached the command center, the door sliding open to reveal a handful of officers trying to regain control. The guards opened fire as soon as they saw them. The princess wasted no time. She was already charging at the officers, her bladed weapon flashing in a deadly arc, slicing through the enemies like paper. Rook barely had time to react, his rifle firing wildly as he defended their position. The officers fell one by one, their resistance futile against the princess's fury. Once the command center was secure, the princess activated the ship's comms. "This is Princess Serana Valaker, rightful heir to the imperial throne. The Sovereign Guard is hereby disbanded. You have one choice: join me in freeing the galaxy or face the consequences." The comms crackled, a moment of stunned silence. Then, a voice came through, cold and defiant. "You think you can change the galaxy, little princess?" the officer sneered. "You're nothing. You're a dead woman walking. Your uncle will never let you take the throne." Serana's eyes flashed with unshakable resolve. "Your regent will fall. And I will see him burn for what he did to my family." The officer let out a sharp laugh. "You're too weak. You'll never make it back. The Sovereign Guard will wipe you out." Before he could say more, the princess closed the comms and turned to Rook. "Prepare the ship. We're getting out of here." Rook nodded and raced to the cockpit. He didn't know how, but they had to survive. They had to escape. He punched in coordinates, his hands shaking as he set a course for the distant, hidden base where Serana's forces were regrouping. As the ship broke away from the Sovereign Guard vessel, Rook glanced back at the princess, who stood by the entrance to the cockpit. Her eyes were cold, but there was a fire burning in them, an unstoppable force that wouldn't rest until she took back what was hers. Rook wasn't just a miner anymore. He was part of something greater, something that would change the future of the galaxy. And as they sped toward the hidden rebel base, a new purpose filled his heart. He wasn't going to let this end in failure. He'd fight beside her, to the very end. Together, they would take down the Sovereign Guard. Together, they would restore the rightful heir to the throne. And the galaxy would never be the same.